Yeah, so for this session, we are going to run through a few things about why dual single sign-on. We are going to show how to actually set up the dual SSO and some of the new features. We are also going to talk about passwordless. So passwordless is something that is embedded inside our single sign-on solution. And we'll actually see a little demo of how that actually works. And finally, we'll move to the last stage of the session where we'll do a hands-on lab enablement. So let's talk about dual single sign-on or dual SSO. So dual single sign-on is actually hosted in our dual web service itself, right? So there's no additional cost for enabling this feature, and it's actually available in all editions of Duo, the Duo Beyond, the Duo Access, and the Duo MFA. So this Duo SSO is actually a identity federation solution. It allows the customer to basically federate the identity from their Active Directory or a Samuel 2.0 cloud-based identity provider into different applications such as Salesforce, Azure, and Microsoft. So if they are actually using the on-prem Active Directory as the authentication method, then they would need some on-prem components to be deployed. However, if they are using a cloud-based solution such as Azure or Ping Identity, then all the infrastructure would be in the cloud and the customer would not need anything to be deployed on-prem. So in the configuration portion, this is a screenshot of the configuration page. Actually, you can see that there are two options here. You either use the Active Directory or you can actually use the Samuel Identity Provider. So this will actually cover all of the requirements from our customers, whether they are in a hybrid environment or if they are actually doing a full cloud deployment. Something to take note of, for the identity source, you can only enable one, right? So you can only enable the Active Directory or a identity provider in the cloud like Azure, but you cannot enable both identity sources to be connected into the dual SSO at the same time. So some of the reasons why we want to talk about dual SSO is it actually helps save time and money for our customers. In our Duo SSO page, we can actually offer a self-service portal. So this would mean that a user can go to our Duo SSO, register their device for multi-factor authentication without having to contact IT. So this takes the operational burden away from IT, and the users can actually freely add and remove their devices or authentication methods into our Duo solution. They use a single set of credentials. So whether you're publishing 20 apps to your users or 10 apps to your users, the same identity is actually used across for all the single sign-on to all these applications. And you can also begin a simple journey into passwordless. So there are a lot of vendors out there that do passwordless, but some of their solutions are actually quite complex to deploy. So with Duo SSO, we make it really, really simple with a kind of 5-minute setup. So we also help IT deploy this in a very seamless manner. We can actually add and remove apps for users in minutes, and we can actually have a very intuitive user interface for users to authenticate. For example, if I'm actually connecting in from a Windows 10 with Windows Hello, that authentication method will be shown to me. However, if Windows Hello is not enabled on my Windows 10 machine, that option will not be shown to the user. So that actually makes things very intuitive and very easy for the users to navigate. We also make things very seamless and secure for our IT to manage because we are actually integrating the Duo MFA in the whole workflow. And we also have holistic security policy. So we can actually detect where the users are connecting in from. If it's against our security policies, we can basically block the users from accessing the environment. So let's take a look at setting up the Duo SSO in a network environment. So this would be a typical deployment of how we actually deploy the Duo SSO. So this diagram assumes that you are using the Active Directory that is on-premise. So your Active Directory would be connected to your Duo authentication proxy, And in a production environment, you will have to deploy a pair of this dual authentication proxy in the internal network segment. This dual authentication proxy can be a Windows or a Linux system. It will, of course, need standard server kind of resources such as DNS, NTP, to actually assign IP addresses and get the correct timings on the service itself. The dual auth proxy itself only needs outbound 443 to the internet. So in a lot of customer environments, you might have an ASA or some VPN deployed in your DMZ. We can actually include that VPN in this authentication workflow as well. So in terms of our Duo SSO, it's hosted with our Duo Cloud system, and you can actually do a direct integration with any third-party SaaS applications such as Azure or AWS. So when the user actually authenticates to the environment from their laptop, they would first go to the third-party SaaS application. They will actually be able to see a button to say, I want to perform single sign-on. And what happens is the Duo SSO would actually connect into the on-prem Duo Auth proxy. The Duo Auth proxy would then communicate with your Active Directory, and it will check against the Active Directory to see if the primary credentials are correct. So if everything is fine, what happens is that authentication traffic flow goes back to our Duo Auth proxy, and from there, it's actually assigned back to the Duo single sign-on. So at this point in time, two things happen. Number one, we form the SAML assertion for that authentication flow, and we send it back into the application that the user is trying to access. At the same time, backend, we would actually use our Duo Cloud service to send a push notification to the user's mobile phone. So after the users have approved that push notification, they will be able to basically get into the app and access the resource that they want. So I know a lot of you would probably want to test this out. So there are actually free domains that you can actually use to set this up using your NFR license or within your own environment. Let's say you're setting up for a home lab, right? So this is called Freenom. So Freenom is actually a third-party website where you can register for a free domain. So you can actually go to this website to actually register for one. So the reason why we want to do this is because the Duo SSO actually requires a TXT record to be added into a public DNS server. So this is to validate that you own the domain and to validate that you are able to authenticate against our Duo SSO using that registered domain. In a production environment, you would also do the same where you actually create a TXT record from our Duo Cloud system, and you would actually send this information to the customer's DNS administrator. They will have to create a public TXT record on their public DNS server, and that would actually permit the users from the company to actually log into Duo SSO with the email domain. Right, so this is a one-time process. After you have validated that you own the domain, you do not have to repeat this again. All right. The reason why we are doing this is we want to protect the user's credentials. So there are actually many instances of many Duo SSO from many customers. And we wouldn't want a user from another company to log in accidentally into a Duo SSO that does not belong to them. So this will actually provide better security for the end users connecting into the environment. So this is basically a screenshot of how we actually configure this on the Freenom, which is the public DNS service, right? So under services, there's actually something called My Domains. So in My Domains, we would be able to manage domains. So as you can see here, I've registered jeffydemo.tk here. So this is free. And I've actually activated this registration. So after we have actually gone to the manage domains, we have the option to go to their name server. And in the name server, we would actually use the default name server here. And from here, we actually go into manage Freenom DNS. So as you can see here, I've actually registered and activated this domain server. So the steps, if the customer is asking you in their production environment, it will depend because they are using many different services. They might be using GoDaddy, they might be using Route 56 from 53 from AWS. So it depends on the administrative steps of the public DNS server, and we do not have documentation for that. The DNS administrator should know how to do this process, right? So as we continue on, if you actually go into the manage free-norm DNS portion, you see that we actually have an option to add an email domain, right? So this is basically your dual admin panel. And in the dual admin panel, after you have set this up, we will actually have this string of text. So this string of text is the txt file that we need to create on the public DNS server. So this information will be copied into your public DNS server. So as you can see, this is a txt type, and this is the string that I copied from the dual admin panel to the public DNS server. And we will actually apply this config to the public DNS server. So depending on how fast the DNS propagates the effect of the DNS change, it can take anywhere between 15 minutes to an hour. Some public DNS services, they take a few hours. So it really depends on how fast it can actually publish this. And this is not within the control of Duo. It's basically based on the public service. So this is something that you need to take note of for the DNS config that is required. So let's move to the dual authentication proxy config. So remember, the dual authentication proxy in this config, it's to basically let the dual SSO know where is my Active Directory, how should I talk to the Active Directory on-prem. So when you're actually doing the configuration file, there will actually be something called an SSO segment. So this SSO segment is unique to the authentication source, so based on your Active Directory. So as you can see here, we actually need a service account from your Active Directory. So if you are doing a POC, if you are doing a production setup, you will need your customer to create a service account for you. The service account does not have to be admin. It can be a normal user account as long as it can read into the Active Directory. Right, so please remember, if you're doing a POC or doing a production, you need to request a service account for this, right? And this is as the location of the config file in order to add this dual SSO section. So after we have added that section into our dual auth proxy config, you have to actually restart your service on the dual auth proxy for the config to take effect. And from there, you can actually verify that the proxy is connected from the dual admin page. So there's actually a button you can click on the dual admin panel to verify that all the configuration and all the connectivity is actually working between the dual auth proxy and the dual SSO setup. Okay, so you would also have something called a subdomain for central. So Duo Central is actually a single pane of glass, a web link, so that the users can actually access all the applications that IT has published for them. So in this section, we would be able to customize something called a subdomain. So this subdomain is where the users will go to whenever they want to log into their different applications. So take note that in this subdomain, you can actually use something that the customer has in their environment. So if I already have company portal.com that is published on the internet, I can actually point the public DNS to this URL, and whenever the users go to company.portal.com, they will be redirected to this URL link. That is possible. Something to take note of, if you're doing a trial account, you cannot change this subdomain name. So what will happen is Duo SSO will publish a random URL here, and you have to use the random URL to access the Duo Central page. However, if the account is a paid account, so customer has paid for this account, they can actually rename this to whatever they want. However, take note that the customer will not be able to rename this subdomain from the Duo admin panel. If they want to rename this subdomain account, they will have to log a tech support case for this to be changed. So please advise your customer to use a meaningful name in this column. So in this stack of slides, we'll actually run through how to configure this based on Active Directory. In your lab environment, because you may not have an Active Directory available, the lab that you will do later will be based on a Samuel identity provider. So this is a cloud identity provider. Okay, so let's run through some of the configuration that we will need to do for the Duo SSO setup. So when you actually choose Active Directory as your identity source, the first thing that we will need to do is we will need to provide a display name. So this is basically the name of your Active Directory, and you will actually provide the IP address or the specified name of your Active Directory in the column here. So remember, this config is going to communicate with your Duo authentication proxy on premise. That is why you can actually use a host name here, because your Duo proxy on prem can resolve the DNS to the local AD in your data center. Typically, in a POC environment, we would use 389 standard ports for communicating with the Active Directory. However, in production, your customer may want it more secure. So that will be 636, and you have to do a bit more config to secure that connectivity between the Duo proxy and the Active Directory. We will use the base DN. So if you're doing a POC, please use the top level domain, right? So in this example, this is the name of my Active Directory, cookie.local, right? So I'm using the top level domain. You can also use different authentication methods like integrated plain text and TLM. So something to take note of, if you are using a Linux system, please choose plain, okay? When you're using integrated, it means that your Duo authentication proxy is a Windows, and that Windows server is joined to the domain. You can actually implement NTLM if you want to have that in the environment as well. So that is also an option. And in this example, we are using clear text for the transport type to make it easy. But in your customer's environment, if you're doing this for a production, your customer might request that you encrypt that traffic between your Active Directory and the Duo auth proxy. So the traffic can be LDAP-S, or you are using start TLS, which essentially means that the traffic is in 443 and not available in clear text. For the Duo SSO setup, normally we need to get an attribute from the Active Directory to log in the user. So this is for the Samuel assertion, and you would normally specify things like mail. So mail is a common attribute in most Active Directories, so we use that email attribute. You can use UPN as well, so you can add different attributes that you want to federate from the Active Directory. And over here, there's also username normalization. So you might log in with domain/user or user@domain.com. So we can actually simplify that name normalization, meaning that whether it's domain/Jeff or Jeff@domain, it's going to recognize Jeff as a valid user of that domain. Okay, so here is that permitted email domains that I mentioned earlier. You have to verify that you own that public domain name, and this will be the TXT account that you have to put into your public DNS service. So after everything has been configured, you would see this page. So when you run the test, it should show that your Active Directory is configured correctly and everything is fine. And you go ahead and save that config. So we can also federate the Duo SSO with Office 365 or Microsoft 365 in this case, okay? So a common question that I always get from partners and a lot of customers is this: can I use Azure AD and federate together with Duo SSO in order for me to log in into Microsoft 365? The answer to that is no. So if you actually go to the official documentation, you will notice that in the official documentation, the only option is to use an on-prem Active Directory. The reason for this is that when you actually do the identity federation from Azure into Duo SSO, and if you try to log into Microsoft 365, it will go into a loop, right? The user will not be able to authenticate. So this is because Microsoft is essentially trying to authenticate into itself through Duo SSO. So that is why it's causing a loop. So we need to actually get the on-prem Active Directory, and there's actually an attribute that we need to pass from the on-prem Active Directory into our Duo SSO before they can log into Office 365. So please take note of this config. So in Duo SSO and Office 365, we can only protect accounts that are federated. So this is actually a print screen of the Office 365 Admin Center. So and in the Office 365 Admin Center, there's actually a requirement for you to activate federation. So in Azure, in Office 365, the domain can be in two modes, managed and federated. Or it's either on or off, right? It's one or the other. So we need to change the whole admin center into federated so that the users of the Office 365 will use the credentials from your Active Directory, and it can be synced with your Azure in order for you to federate the identity and have Duo SSO, the MFA will be in place. Okay, so this is a config that you need to change at the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So over here, what I've done is I actually went to settings, and under settings, you can actually see something called domains. Okay, so at the top, you will actually see two different sort of domains. Domain number one, you will actually see Microsoft on Microsoft.com. So essentially what this means is on Microsoft.com, this is an unfederated domain, right? What will happen is anybody trying to log in with an on Microsoft.com account will not have the ability to have multi-factor authentication. Only users of the bottom domain, jeffydomain.tk, this one is federated, this one will get the multi-factor authentication. And as you can see, you need to actually validate the service. So status should be healthy after you have actually validated the domain and you have changed the federation from the default on Microsoft.com to the jeffydomain.tk. So after you have set all of that config up in the environment, so this is going to be the end user experience when you connect into Duo SSO or if you actually go to Microsoft 365. So here you can see that this screen is actually our Duo SSO user interface. I'm actually using a user from my environment. And from here, we are actually connecting into the domain using the credentials from the Active Directory. And after that, we would actually go into Duo Central. So this page that you see here, this tile is actually from our Duo Central page. The users can click on it. We will actually get them to confirm their identity with multi-factor authentication. And we can actually trust this browser. So in order to have better user experience, you can actually configure Remember Me in the Duo policies so that they won't be prompted for multi-factor authentication so many times. The user will actually see this screen. So this screen is actually from Microsoft. So Microsoft always asks the users, hey, do you want to save your username so that you don't get prompted so many times? So you can go ahead and click on yes. From there, the users will be able to log into their Office environment. So let me show you how that experience is also like if we were to use our passwordless experience, right? So here I'm going to go into Duo Central, right? So I've configured Duo Central together with a Active Directory user credentials. So this is my Active Directory user credentials. Notice something interesting. On this page, I only have email. I don't have a password field. That's because I've already registered my account for passwordless. Okay, so I'm going to click on next. So what's going to happen is it's going to prompt me for Touch ID. Because I'm on a Mac and Mac have a Touch ID, I'm going to use my finger to scan. So after I scan my fingerprint, I am going to be authenticated. I'm going to get into Duo Central. Notice that I did not have to key in a password. Okay. So from here, the users can click on Microsoft 365. So I've federated identity between Office 365 Duo SSO and my Active Directory. One-click access into Office 365. There is no dual prompt. There's no additional login required for the users. Users are single sign-on directly into Office 365. So before users access this Office 365, yes, we can add another policy to say, I need you to perform multi-factor authentication again. That is customizable. But if we want a seamless experience for the users, this is basically some of the policies that we can create for the users. Okay, so that's the passwordless experience for Duo SSO and Office 365. Okay. So the Duo SSO, I think we run through the setup already. So we can actually set this up for other demos. So if you're interested to do what I've just shown you, you can actually sign up for a free Azure account. So that free Azure account would actually come with Microsoft 365. And you can actually show this demo to the customers in your own environment. Or if you're actually setting up with your NFR license, you can actually do that as well. So we also have other free integrations that you can actually integrate to show your customers, right? So there's AWS, there's actually a free tier. So you can register for a free AWS account and show that whole single sign-on experience into AWS. Follow the documentation on the duo.com. And in Salesforce, there's also something called Developer Edition. So what it means is you get a free Salesforce account, and you can actually show that whole identity federation single sign-on for the user into Salesforce for Duo SSO, right? So these are the other two kind of free resources that you can try in your own environment. Okay, so let's talk a bit about troubleshooting, right? So when you're actually setting up the Duo authentication proxy, a lot of partners and customers kind of have problem, right? I can't start the service. Like what do I do? So a lot of times you can just Google Duo plus whatever you're looking for, and normally that will have a KB article to tell you how to solve the problem. But built within our Duo authentication proxy is a connectivity tool, right? So this connectivity tool can actually help to tell you what is wrong in the environment when you run the connectivity tool. Whether the Duo proxy doesn't have outbound access to Duo Cloud, whether one of your configuration is wrong, whether one of your letters is actually wrongly typed. So all these would actually be shown directly from our connectivity tool. So please make use of this connectivity tool. And when you're actually troubleshooting the Duo Auth proxy with Duo SSO is another thing. If your Duo authentication proxy is offline, right, for too long, what happens is you actually need to rerun a command for the Duo authentication proxy to connect back into the Duo SSO. So here it's an example, right? You see this status is not connected to Duo. So this is because I turned off my Duo Auth proxy for about, I think it was 3 weeks. And I need to actually generate a command from the Duo Cloud Admin panel. So it actually gives me a string of text, and I have to paste that string of text on my Duo Auth proxy, run it again, restart the service, and from then on, the Duo Auth proxy will be able to connect back into the Duo SSO. Okay, so let's talk about some of the new features in our Duo SSO. So previously, we only supported one Active Directory, but customers have feedback, right? I have multiple Active Directories in my environment. I want to get all of the Active Directories connected into the Duo SSO. Or a company might be merging between, there's merger between two companies. So what happens is we need to get all the identity federated for all the employees. So we actually have a config where you can actually get multiple kind of Active Directories configured in this case, and you will be able to basically get all the users to federate their identities into Duo SSO through this method. So we also have a new feature that's currently available. So a lot of times customers have said, hey, password resets is actually a very troublesome process, right? And I have to get my users to actually run through this again and again. So in Duo SSO, we have connection to an Active Directory. Now you can actually reset that password directly from the Duo SSO page. So this actually saves time for the user and IT. They don't have to redirect the users into a different portal to actually reset their passwords. But something to take note of in this use case, it is not for use case where I want to change my password now, but my password is still valid, right? So let's say I forget my password, it has not expired. I want to go to Duo SSO, I want to do a password reset. That doesn't work. It only detects if the password has expired and it needs the user to do a change. So please take note of this. So I mentioned earlier that Duo SSO is actually Duo Central is part of Duo SSO. So some of the useful thing is actually a single location where users can get access to all the applications. The other use case of why we want to deploy Duo Central to all our customers is this self-service registration. So a lot of times customer, they have a use case that say, I have an on-prem ASA. I'm using Radius to integrate with the ASA, but my users need to register for Duo. So how do I register my users? So what we can do is we can get the backend system to send an email to the user to do registration. But if we want to improve the user experience, we can actually deploy Duo Central, and the users can actually log into Duo Central to add and remove their devices whenever they change or lose their device. So that is actually a better user experience, and it removes the operational problem with users changing their devices, okay? So I want to talk about the problem with passwordless. So in passwordless, a lot of ticket help desks are actually generated. Between 20 to 50% of help desk tickets is because you have too many applications, you've forgotten your password, and you need to change it. And what happens is the users will use the same password across all the applications. And there are many, many applications in the environment. And what happens is users tend to use very weak passwords. And this is a cause for credentials being stolen. Okay, so the promise of passwordless is this. We want to reduce the user friction by making it very simple, and we want to increase security. Because we are using asymmetric keys, the users don't have to remember a password, and that actually reduces theft in terms of their credentials. So why do we want to use Duo to tell our customers, hey, start your passwordless journey with Duo instead of a vendor that's selling a passwordless solution? It's actually very, very simple to try. Because even in the MFA edition, you can set up Duo SSO. There's no additional fees, there's no additional license required. And as long as the application is federated together with Duo SSO, you get the passwordless experience. And it's also really easy to use, right? The setup is actually taking a few minutes. It's actually very easy to enroll and authenticate with the service. And you can actually do a phased rollout to a small group of users, then you can expand it to the whole population. And you can register multiple devices. So I may have a YubiKey, I may have Touch ID, I may have Windows Hello. I can register all of that passwordless methods into the system really, really easily. And it's actually very seamless and secure. So every time you authenticate into one application, and if it fails, let's say my Windows Hello, it takes the camera to work, right? But if my camera is not working, I can actually fall back to do the Duo push on my phone. We have a fallback mechanism to MFA. So something interesting to note, some of the vendors out there for passwordless, they don't have MFA. So it either works with passwordless or it fails. So that's actually something better and to take note of. So let's take a look at Duo passwordless, how we actually configure, enroll, and authenticate the users. All right, so this is going to be a video that I'm going to play. So in this demo, what's going to happen is this is on screen. So this is the Duo admin panel that we have the single sign-on. And the single sign-on, we actually have something called passwordless. So enabling passwordless is really easy. Yeah, we actually click through a wizard and we actually get the users to set up the passwordless. So this takes about 5 minutes to set up. So in this example, I'm using the Active Directory as the authentication source. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to go to policies and we actually need to edit the policy for authentication. So in this example, you see under authentication methods, you have the traditional 2FA methods. And at the bottom, you see passwordless authentication methods. So this will be based on platform authenticators, things like Face ID, Touch ID, Windows Hello. And there's also things like security key that you can use. So the next step would be the enrollment process, right? So now we actually take a look at how we actually enroll the end user. So here is the same dual admin panel. You see that username that I used earlier. The user will key in their password and to log in. So the first time we actually ask the users if they want to perform the MFA. So after they approve the MFA push notification, so the next step would be we will actually detect that you have not registered for passwordless and ask the user if they want to set it up. So they can go ahead and click on continue. So there's actually a few things. We actually detect what kind of passwordless method you have. So I have a Touch ID. So we can actually tell the users that the information is not shared with Duo, right? So the biometrics information is not shared directly with Duo. So after the users actually acknowledge this and click on continue, so what's going to happen is we'll ask the users to verify themselves with the Touch ID. So after scanning the fingerprint, the Touch ID is actually added into the Duo and the setup is complete. So here, let's take a look at the end user experience when we sign in. So this would be what I shown you earlier, right? I key in my email address to actually log into the system. I click on next and you'll notice that there is no password, right? So all the user has to do is to scan the fingerprint ID. Yeah, after the user scan the fingerprint and we actually log into the system, all right? So that's how we actually do the enrollment for the end user's perspective, right? So there are actually many steps to actually move towards this multi-factor authentication. So today, most of our customers, most of our users will be using this method: username, password, MFA into a cloud system, into a SaaS system, into something that's on-prem like a VPN. So how we are actually going to move in this journey is we will try to consolidate all the users' authentication into one platform, which is the Duo SSO, and they can actually authenticate with passwordless, whether it's SaaS-based application, on-prem application, and to things like even our Cisco ASA. And we can actually add additional security layers. So we can actually do things like device trust, like checking if the endpoint is compliant with our security policies. Does it have an anti-malware agent? Does it have firewall turned on? And back end in Duo, we can actually get the continuous risk detection. So this would be based on our user behavior analytics called Trust Monitor, as we actually continuously evaluate for risky behavior for the end users. So Duo SSO is going to be in every edition for passwordless. But the thing is, if they are actually looking to doing passwordless for Windows Logon, it's probably going to be in the Duo Access and Beyond edition. So this is still in the roadmap. It's not available today, right? We are still working on passwordless for Windows Logon. So why we actually want to do Duo SSO and passwordless, we want to actually make the end users authentication experience really, really simple. We want to actually deploy and manage all of the devices very, very simply for all the IT security professionals managing out there. right? And there will be fewer authentication and passwordless, meaning we will actually reduce the total attack surface area, making it easier to actually start the journey with Duo. Okay, so that's how we can actually save time and money for all our customers in the long run. So there are actually many different resources already available, and you will actually get this deck of slides where you can actually get this information on how to actually do administration and how we actually can do all the integration. All right. So some of the resources that I wanted to call, if you're actually setting up in using your NFR license, or if you're actually setting up a home lab, there are actually a lot of free hypervisors out there. You can actually use VMware, right? So there's one for VMware. There's also an eval version for Windows Server 2019, so you can use this for a month, and you can actually virtualize your Active Directory, and you can actually set up the dual auth proxy using the virtualized platform. Microsoft 365 is actually free. You just need a credit card to sign on, and you can actually get that trial for a period of time. And Azure Active Directory is actually free perpetual for you, so you can actually have the identity in Azure. In today's lab environment, we are going to use JumpCloud. So JumpCloud is actually similar to Azure. It is a cloud identity provider. So you can actually sign up for a free account, and you will do that in your lab today. And what I mentioned earlier, if you want to play around and set up the SSO, you can actually sign up for a free AWS account, a free Salesforce developer account, and you can actually start to get the dual SSO set up. Okay, so that would be the end of my slides for today. So what we are going to do next is we are going to talk about the lab environment. So Martin is going to help me with distributing some of the lab details to all the end users. And from there, you will be able to get an instance of dcloud. So dcloud environment has a few things. It has a ICE, it has an Active Directory, it has an ASA. So today's lab is going to be based on the dcloud environment. But if you have an actual setup using an NFR license in your own company, you can actually use your own ASA to actually do this lab as well. So this concept in this lab would apply for a POC, would also apply for a production setup. Just that in production, of course, you need to set up for HA environments. Okay, so that is not covered on how to set up in HA, but you will be able to get things technically working. So let's take a look at the requirements. So what you actually need to do this lab, right? So of course, you need a laptop to actually do all the configuration. You need an operationally working Duo account. So for those who are not aware, you can sign up for free NFR license, and you can reach out to Martin if you have questions around the NFR. If you don't have a Duo account, please go to duo.com, and there's actually a free trial here, right? So you can go ahead and sign up for a free trial with your personal email address or your company's using your company email address to actually get an account. So you can actually do this lab environment today. And you also need a operationally working JumpCloud account. So how we actually sign up for JumpCloud? So this is actually in our lab today. So you can follow the instructions to get your JumpCloud environment registered, up and running. And obviously, to do any Duo push, you need the Duo mobile app installed on your personal phone, right? So please download the Duo mobile app on your phone. So we are going to use the dcloud lab environment for this lab today. But if you have a production ASA that you want to configure this, right, you are free to use your production ASA. So basically, the first step, we are going to register for JumpCloud. JumpCloud is basically a cloud-based service, a SaaS-based service. It actually provides identity for things like Macintosh, Linux, as well as Windows. And we can actually get 10 free user license. So this is perpetual 10 free licenses that we can actually use to federate with our Duo SSO. And in the lab for today, we are basically going to configure Duo SSO plus a Samuel 2.0 integration with ASA. Okay. So the lab would actually take you through how to actually sign up for the account. We will also talk through how we actually configure the different settings on JumpCloud, like how we actually create a user, how we actually map the user to a group, and how we actually basically set up the Duo SSO from scratch, right? So here you can actually see, you can actually activate and set up the Duo SSO. There will also be reference to the public documentation where you can actually follow the documentation online on how to configure your identity providers together with your SSO. So all the links that you need are actually in the document itself. So what I want to also mention at the end of this is we are also going to look at the end user experience. So I've actually recorded a video on YouTube and it's posted on YouTube. So you can actually go to the link on YouTube to actually watch how this whole experience is going to be like. So here it's basically the dcloud environment, and this is the ASA client on the VM. So when you fire up the ASA client, you see that this is a web page prompt. So this web page is actually from ASA, and it's actually calling to JumpCloud. So it's actually asking you to log in with a user that you have registered in JumpCloud. So after the user has keyed in the username and password, and you will actually do the identity federation between your JumpCloud environment and Duo SSO, get the Samuel assertion, and we will actually get the Duo push notification on the end user's device. Okay, so you saw that Duo little icon, verify your identity. Duo push notification happens on the Duo mobile device, and the user is connected into the VPN. Okay, so that's basically the end user experience, and you can actually follow the instructions in the lab guide. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off the lab then. So if you have any questions, me and Martin will be online and you can ask your questions. We'll keep the session open for the next few minutes.